Okay, right. So we're going to start with the question, why are plan and evaluation so important to student teachers and the learning of student teachers?
Well, teaching is such a complicated thing, isn't it? As experienced teachers, there's so much goes into our plan of our lessons and our schemes of learning. And student teachers arrive into the classroom without any of that real experience behind them. So when they're trying to plan for learning, what they tend to do, I find, is they tend to think about their own performance. They look at what teachers do and they try to sort of sometimes mimic that a little bit. And what am I going to be doing as a teacher in the classroom? So fundamentally, they focus on the pedagogy side of it, which is a huge part of planning, and they plan for their pedagogy. But I think what they perhaps don't do is think about two other fundamentals of lesson planning, which is the purpose, i.e. the learning intentions, and then the assessment, are pupils learning those things? The student teachers tend to rush to that pedagogy without a real grasp of what the learning intentions actually are. If they grasp what those learning intentions are, really specifically, the pedagogy then becomes a little bit clearer and more straightforward, and fundamentally the assessment of that learning becomes far clearer. If we're clear on what it is we want the pupils to learn, it's far easier to assess whether the pupils have learned those things. But like I say, student teachers arrive with very little experience. They tend to imitate what they see a little bit and focus a little bit more on the pedagogy. If they could bring in those other two aspects, the purpose, the learning intentions, and the assessment, then I think their lessons and the learning for the pupils would be far more effective, really. So I think, grasping those fundamentals are really, really important.
Yeah, and I think, it's understandable, isn't it, that they're observing a lot, and what they see, they think that's what I've got to do. But they don't necessarily link or connect with the fact that there's been a whole set of planning that's gone into this, a huge part of evaluation that's gone into this lesson happening.
The thought process.
The thought process behind it. They're just
doing.
seeing the magic happening. I mean, and then it's sort of, well, I've got to do that. So I think it has to be absolutely, made clear to them and become a visible part of that process, guiding them through those parts. This is what I did here. This is that part of the planning. Did you notice this? This is the evaluation part. Exactly.
Yeah, fantastic. And actually that brings us on to the next point, which is that element of evaluation. Why is evaluation as a process such an intrinsic part of the planning cycle?
Yeah, you can't have planning without evaluation. They're inextricably linked. You can't have one without the other. I mean, if you're going into plan a lesson, you have to know how that lesson has landed, how the learners have grasped it, how's everybody got it, where are we all at? You might have to take it a few steps back, you might need to take it a few steps forward, but you absolutely cannot plan without evaluating and knowing it's those outcomes, isn't it, as well? It's looking at and thinking about the assessment of those learners.
Yeah,
because I think what the student teachers tend to a little bit, certainly when they started off in their evaluation, is they tend to evaluate their own performance in the classroom. What did I do as a teacher?
Yeah.
But it's making them sort of see the shift from evaluating their own performance to evaluating the learning. What did the pupils actually grasp in this lesson? And if they can think along those lines, I think the evaluations become more efficient, essentially, and which feeds into the plan of the next series of lessons.
Yeah, as you say, it's that cycle, isn't it? So, the evaluating, planning, teaching, evaluating, and it feeds forward. Fantastic. So how do we ensure that student teachers understand how to plan and evaluate? Because it is a complex process that for many of our mentors is second nature now. So how do we ensure that student teachers develop those skills?
I think probably the best tool mentors have to help student teachers with this is the planning template on the PLP, really. So that's got the fundamentals of planning incorporated in it. So you've got your learning intentions, your purpose, and really explicitly focusing on those a little bit. You've got sections then for the pedagogy, how we're going to enable that learning to happen. And then there's the section thinking about assessment. How do we know if pupils have learned it? But also part of that built in then is the evaluation, where student teachers can evaluate what's happened in the room. Yes, their own performance as a teacher, but importantly, the evaluation of the learning that's actually occurred in that room.
Okay, so how does the mentor feature in this? How do our mentors support the planning and evaluation processes for student teachers?
I suppose it can be quite tricky for a mentor because the planning template on the PLP is probably very different or slightly different to what they're used to in their own institutions, and every school sort of plans in slightly different ways. But the way the mentor can support really is to think about fundamentally all lesson plans revolve around essentially those three fundamentals: the learning intentions, plan for the pedagogy, and plan for the assessment. So as long as the mentor is focusing on those three aspects and talking through those three aspects with the student teacher, that's a real way of supporting their planning and therefore their evaluation.
Yeah, I think as well, it's going back to that thing about making sure that, your thought processes as a mentor, whilst you're teaching, that they're made clear, that there's links back to, why you've done those things, why you've planned for those things. And you can make that explicit both, whilst planning alongside your student, or, during the actual teaching. There's moments where you can pull that back to, this is why I planned for this. This is why this works at this point in this lesson. Just to be really, really clear about that.
Yeah, it's that learning to drive analogy, isn't it?
It is. It's exactly that.
Yeah, it's all those little processes that we now do on autopilot without thinking them through.
Exactly.
Yet. They have to verbalise those and explain them to the student teachers.
Because we may not, as experienced teachers, you may not, plan in the detail that you have to as a student teacher. But that means that you need to be even more clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah, and using that planning template, the log on the PLP as a record over time, how useful is that?
I think that's really important, because what you've got there is sort of is progression, essentially, haven't you? Or hopefully you've got progression. So you've got a series of lesson plans and how student teachers' planning is developing and evolving over time. And as a mentor, you can sort of look at those as the whole of it and sort of diagnose where sort of issues may be, gaps in knowledge or understanding, and then think about what can I do then as a mentor to support those things if I'm seeing things coming up again and again. What steps can I put in to support the student teachers to make progress? So as a series, they offer a sort of a diagnostic tool, I suppose.